Today we're going to cover Review 15 and Review 16, so please get both worksheets out on your desk. They kind of go together, and since we're trying to cover 2 lessons at once, I'm going to let you skip a few problems. Review 15 has to do with fractions to percents. Remember, percent means per 100. So if we can just change the fraction to something over 100, then we'll have the percent. And remember, decimals to percent is really just moving the decimal spot. So if it starts out as a decimal, we move it 2 spaces to the right. And if it starts out as a percent, we move the decimal 2 spaces to the left. Okay, let's look at the guided practice for Review 15. On this first one, we are comparing fractions and percents, so we want them both to be in the same form. And it's probably easiest if we just change the fraction to a percent. I can easily change 25 to something over 100. I just need to multiply by 4. So if I do that on top, 21 times 4 would be 82. So that would be 82%. And 82% is greater than 21. So we have a greater than sign right there. The alligator always wants to eat the larger number. And please don't draw alligator teeth. Let's go to this one over here. We want to change it to something over 100. What would I need to do to 50 to change it to 100? Times 2. So what is 27 times 2? 54. So this is 54%. 54 is larger than 27, so the alligator wants to eat the 54%. We're going to skip these 2. And let's look over here at number 2. It says to write each ratio as a percent. Again, percent means over 100. And look, all of these say 100. So if percent means something over 100, it's just that number. 45 out of 100 would be 45%. And that is a different way to write a ratio. It's called a colon, 26.5 colon 100. So there's 26.5 to every 100 calories. So that's 26.5%. The next one says 33 1/3 per 100, so that would be 33 1/3%. Number 3, it says write the fraction 24 over 25 as a percent. Percent means over 100, so I want to make an equivalent fraction with the denominator of 100. Think about quarters. What would I need to do to 25 to get to 100? Times 4. So if I do that on top, I get 96. So as a percent, that would be 96%. Number 4. It says write the percent 35% as a fraction in simplest form. Percent means over 100, so 35% would be 35 over 100. But we have to simplify. What could we divide both of those numbers by? 5 will work. So 35 divided by 5 makes 7, and 100 divided by 5 makes 35. Number 5. It snowed in Colorado 34.4% of the days in January. Express this number as a fraction with a denominator of 100 and as a fraction with a denominator of 1,000. Well, since percent means over 100, 34.4% would be 34.4 over 100. And yes, we can have a decimal on top of a fraction. But then they want us to change it to a denominator of 1,000. What would we need to do to 100 to change it to 1,000? We could multiply by 10. So I need to multiply by 10 on top. So 34.4 times 10. And some of you may already know a trick. If you don't, you can work it out, just like I'm doing. Move it one space over, which makes 344. If you multiply by a 10, you're just really moving the decimal over to the right, one space. We're going to skip number 6, so you can write the word skip. Then your teacher will know that I told you to skip it. We're also going to skip number 7. We did a similar problem like that on Friday. So let's go to number 8. Francisco took a survey of his friends and recorded the information in the chart. What percent of Francisco's friends chose math as their favorite subject? Well, we can't just put that number over 100. We need a total. So add all those numbers together, and we get 30. So 12 out of 30 prefer math. Now, to make that a percent, I could divide and change it to a decimal and then move the decimal space. Or I could try simplifying and see if it comes out to one of those fractions I was supposed to memorize. That might be a little bit shorter. What could I divide 12 and 30 by? 6 works. So 12 divided by 6 makes 2, and 30 divided by 6 makes 5. And 2/5 is one of those fractions you're supposed to memorize. Remember, fifths is like counting $20 bills. So 2 of those would be 0.40. Now, if I want to change it to a percent, I move it 2 spaces to the right. That is 40%. Let's look at Review 16, Guided Practice now. That one is decimal to percent. And we remember decimal to percent by using Dr. Pepper, DP. If it's a decimal and we want to change it to a percent, we go to the right 2 spaces. If it's a percent and we want to change it to a decimal, we go to the left 2 spaces. DP. Number 1 says write each percent as a decimal. So let's start with 7%. We need to change that by moving the decimal 2 spaces to the left. But there's only 1, so I need to fill in a 0. So it's decimal 07. The next one, moving it 2 spaces, it would be decimal 273. And the next one, 2 spaces. I'm going to need that 0 again. So decimal 075. Okay, and the next one, move it 2 spaces. Always 2 spaces, always to the left. If you're going from a percent to a decimal, it's like it's running away from the percent sign. Now let's try to go the other direction. Number 2 says write each decimal as a percent. So this time we're going from the decimal over to the percent. It's like we're running towards the percent sign, and we're going to move it 2 spaces to the right. So if we move this first one 2 spaces to the right, I'm going to need one of those zeros. The decimal goes there, so that's 370%. And yes, sometimes we have greater than 100%. Okay, the next one, 2 spaces. I have to add one of those zeros, so that makes 50%. And this one, 2 spaces, it goes right next to the 6. So 6%. 2 spaces, 1, 2. It's between the 9 and the 2. 19.2%. Number 3, we're going to compare each pair. We want them to be in the same form. So let's change them both to decimals. Remember, if I'm going from a decimal to a percent, I go to the right, and for a percent to a decimal, I'm going to go to the left 2 spaces. I'm running away from the percent sign. So start where the decimal is and go 2 spaces. That would be 0.088. And if you line them up, put in an extra 0 to help us compare. 8 is bigger than 0, so the one on the left is bigger. We want a greater than sign. Okay, the next one, I'm going to move the decimal 2 spaces to change that percent to a decimal. That would make that 0.15, 15 hundredths. Well, if you think of it like money, $1.50 is a whole lot more than 15 cents. So again, we need a greater than sign. Number 4 says to write the percent as a decimal. Well, I don't see a decimal. Instead, I see a fraction. So first I need to change that fraction to a decimal. 10.5% is really 10.5%. So first you want to actually replace the fraction, but I haven't changed it from a percent. I need to move the decimal 2 spaces to the right, like it's running away from the percent sign. So that's 0.105. You know, I knew a half, but 21 over 50, I might need to think about. Remember, if I change it to something over 100, then the top number will be my decimal. So 50 times 2 is 100. 21 times 2 would make 42. So this would be 39.42%. And then to change it to a decimal, I move it 2 spaces to the left, which would make it 0.3942. Number 5. Pablo put 100% of his pencils in his backpack. What is 100% as a decimal number? Well, we move the decimal 2 spaces. So 1, 2 goes right there. So that's 1.00, or just 1. 100% as a decimal is just 1. Okay, we're going to skip 6, 7, and 8. So if you want to write that down so your teacher knows, I told you you could skip it. Write skip on 6, 7, and 8. And then let's look at your independent practice. I'm going to go back to 15 and look at the independent practice. You're just going to put one of these symbols on number 1, and on number 2, you're going to write them as a percent. Remember, if it's out of 100, it's just that number with a percent sign. Number 3, you want to change it to a percent, and percent is over 100. So whatever goes on top of 100, it'll be that with a percent sign. Number 4 says to write the percent 44% as a fraction in simplest form. So it's going to be 44 over something, and then you have to simplify it. Number 5 says of the 7th graders at JMS, 16 out of 25 plan to attend the first Stuco dance. What percent is equivalent to 16 over 25? Well, percent means per 100. So if you figure out what it would be over 100, then you can write it with a percent sign. Let's look at number 6. Several stores are having back-to-school sales. The chart shows the price reduction at each store. Write the percent in the chart for each fraction. I'm going to start at the bottom of the chart. 2/5 would be, remember fifths is like counting by 20, so 2 of them would be 40. And then we just move the decimal 2 spaces to make a percent. 40%. And Stuff Mart is 1/4. 1/4 is like 1/4, and a 1/4 is 0.25. Move the decimal 2 spaces, and that would be 25%. Okay. But what is 2/3 as a decimal? 0.6 repeating. Well, if I move the decimal 2 spaces, I can't put in a 0 there because it's repeating 6, so I'd have to put in another 6. So it would be 66, no, not percent. We have to show that it's repeating, so we have to put another 6 to show that it keeps going. Otherwise, there's a difference between 66% and 66.6 repeating percent. Also, on the STAR test, often they write this as 66 and 2/3 to show that it keeps repeating. So rather than write it as a decimal, they leave it as a fraction. Let's look at the independent practice on Review 16. The first 2 should be pretty easy, and number 3, if you change them both to decimals, they're pretty easy to compare. Let's talk about number 4. We need to change those to decimals as percents instead of fractions. We need to get rid of that fraction. So this will be 17 point, what's 2/5? 0.4%. And then you move the decimal 2 spaces, so that would make it 0.174. And you're going to do the same thing for the other one. Get rid of the fraction first. So it's going to be 40 point, I don't know, what's 3/4 as a decimal? Something, you can fill in that blank.